Hello to almost 7,000 new people in 2 days to this page, where I'm not anti-Buddhist, but I do need to clarify that after running down Ezra Klein for Buddha-splaining away Coates' points about how you can't throw vulnerable people under the bus because of polling. I wanted to come back on here and speak to some great questions that came in about the political tendencies of modern white convert Buddhism. But first, I really just want to affirm that I'm not cynical in general about the positive organizational and community impacts of religion and spirituality. Like, my anti-fascism welcomes all of that. And if you know who Dietrich Bonhoeffer is, you'll know why I think that. Okay, so about Buddhism. I personally find Buddhism to be an incredibly rich, diverse, sometimes revolutionary wisdom tradition that, in its best forms, combines existential maturity with the deconstruction of oppressive social norms like caste. Now, I'm not a scholar, but I am a journalist on this stuff with some solid resources, and I've spent personal time in Buddhist communities, both good and bad, including time spent in a Buddhist cult led by a guy named Michael Roach. When I clock Ezra Klein as deploying a white convert Buddhist strategy to wiggle out of a moment of intellectual crisis, I'm not saying that's what Buddhism teaches, or what Buddhists do in general, or what all white Buddhists do. The politics of Buddhism are contingent. In the 1940s, some Japanese Zen monasteries swung towards the fascists. In the 1950s, Ambedkar led a Buddhist Dalit revolutionary movement in India against caste oppression. Thich Nhat Hanh has been a powerful anti-war advocate for many, many decades. And these days, there's actually a Buddha Bro alt-right pipeline. It's all over the place. So I'm pegging the Klein moment to a documented critique of the post-war globalization of Indian wisdom culture as a wellness commodity, which then becomes the de facto religion of neoliberalism, because its main sacrament is to valorize individual self-management and to make the flow state of productivity and problem solving its own salvation reward. And of course, this helps to obscure the destruction of government as a social project. I mean, think about it. Bosses might love it when you meditate and self-regulate and monitor your own thoughts like you are your own CCTV system against anger. They might love the fact that the Sanskrit word yoga means union, because then you might forget about unions. There are many starting places for this analysis, but I think that an obvious one to reflect on with regard to our era is the moment in 1969 when alleged sex abuser Swami Satchidananda took the stage in white robes to open the Woodstock Festival as a paragon of ancient wisdom. Now, my colleagues and I write about this same moment in our book, Conspirituality, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit from that here. The Swami is speaking into the crackling PA, and he says, often we hear groups of people shouting, "Fight for peace." And, of course, he's referring to the anti-Vietnam War movement or the civil rights clashes of previous years. He goes on, "I still don't understand how they are going to fight and then find peace. Therefore, let us not fight for peace, but let us find peace within ourselves first." And so, with a few ohms, all of those stoned and muddy kids on that hill were relieved of the exhaustion of 1960s political struggle. They could groove to the universal sounds of consciousness in acid rock and folk music. And many of them would go on to take up yoga and meditation for health and wellness, not really knowing that it was part of a soft power export of Hindu nationalism that smuggled in a lot of body fascist beliefs around purity and things like that that now plague mainstream yoga. Transnational Buddhist meditation is tied to this movement, and it begins as the reconstruction and popularization pioneered by the Burmese business tycoon SN Goenka. Now, Goenka positioned his technique as a way of allowing regular urban professionals in India to tolerate and balance the stresses of work. His politics were pretty conservative, and he stressed in speeches to the UN and other places that meditation was and should always be apolitical. Early adopters of practices like Vipassana in Europe and North America were of the social and economic class that could afford long trainings and retreats that would take them out of the mess of political life. And then many of them professionalized as they mastered these techniques and became entrepreneurs in a workshop culture of self-improvement. In the global north, these commodified practices and their communities are sometimes associated with progressive values like environmentalism, and more recently, many have found solace in mindfulness communities as places where they can heal trauma. But there are also some communities where people literally believe that doing social work compromises their enlightened vision of changing the world through meditation alone. Overall, in my opinion, the most consistent politics we find are in what sociologist Sam Binkley calls the self-project of getting loose. Now, this is an awesome book, and I'll summarize it I'll try to make it 100 words. The 1970s, Binkley argues, ushered in a period of getting loose in relation to the body, work expectations, family relations, and political allegiances. Now, this happens as the great moral and political questions of the 1960s deflate without resolution, even as they enshrine looser social mores around sex and finding meaningful work. And let me just break in there to say that when Ezra Klein says from his six-figure podcast chair, I don't know what role I'm supposed to play, this confusion of, am I a journalist? Am I an opinion writer? Am I a party consultant? He's partly speaking from that neoliberal fluidity of temporary creator class jobs and personal brands. And meditation in that context is meant to help us flow through all of that in the absence of real forms of security. Of course, he's no longer in the precariat, if he ever was. Now, back to the summary. The actual cultural yearning for structural change found its home in the project of the self, facilitated by an accelerated consumerism that expands the conflation of agency with consumption. Getting loose characterizes this inward turn as a retreat from the terrors of revolutionary freedom. So let me just repeat that line because it's so important, I think. Getting loose characterizes this inward turn as a retreat from the terrors of revolutionary freedom. And I think it's important because that's the Klein moment with Coates. Coates is saying MLK was murdered for offering love. And in that, I hear this is the epitome of revolutionary freedom. And it's terrifying. And Klein's instinct is to turn inward with what seemed to be a planned digression into personal practice. Now, rolling forward, today, millions of people have benefited from mindfulness and other forms of meditation. I don't want to knock that. I don't want to take anything away from you folks, including myself. I've benefited greatly, but there are two political danger zones in the meditation world I think it's good to be aware of. First of all, there's the low-key solipsism of believing that internal life will transform external life. This is the be the change you want to see in the world fallacy. And it's really useful for HR departments implementing wellness protocols. And it's really attractive for people who feel overwhelmed by the idea of actually doing politics in their neighborhoods. Now, if you are around Buddhists who don't have a strong social activism game, there's also some articles of faith that they can really twist into what's known as spiritual bypassing. One is the truism that life is suffering, and the other is that everything is impermanent. And both of these things are true, but they're both easily weaponized against empathy, which is what I think we saw with that Klein moment. Finally, you can also learn about some real masters who understood how not to let this stuff become white liberal lifestyle vibes. These are not the Silicon Valley oligarchs who discovered that mindfulness could discipline their workers in a friendly way and maybe ease their own guilt. Like, you can learn about people like Rosa Parks, who started practicing yoga in conjunction with her Methodist faith as a way to restore herself from the stress of political struggle. Or Black Power feminist Angela Davis learned to practice yoga and meditation after her arrest and imprisonment in 1970. And in 1988, Black feminist philosopher Audre Lorde wrote about her contemplative practices that caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. Bottom line is, mindfulness is a tool and it presents a fork in the road. You can use it like Jack Dorsey to optimize, or you can use it like Rosa to build a different world. And you're not alone with that, because there are Buddhist groups out there rooted in Black radical or disability or queer politics if you look for them.